Today's podcast is brought to you by a company who we have been using for years and takes up significant shelf space inside of our own kitchen. Biosteel Sports Nutrition.
It was a product created out of necessity 8 years ago and is trusted by athletes like Connor McDavid, Tyler Seguin, Brooke Henderson, Rosie MacLennan, and Andrew Wiggins.
They're really a leader in sports drinks for everyone from professional athletes to everyday champions.
Understand something, guys. Nothing worth ever having in this world comes easy.
Do what these champions doing if you're going to be a champion.
You control your outcome.
Who am I?
I'm a champion.
What up, champions? Brand new Biosteel Breakdown. As always, I'm your host, Adrian, with my co-host,
Sylvie.
And we hope you caught this week's podcast because it was dope. We had on the one and only Cabby Richards, and we had a great time. So hopefully you caught it.
Yeah, it was a great episode.
Today's Biosteel Breakdown is a personal one. This one's close to the heart and a topic that I knew very little about up until a couple of years ago. And now we both know, I think, a large amount about this topic. So what are we talking about today, Sil?
We are talking about the gluten-free diet.
The gluten-free diet, the gluten-free phenomenon. So I'm not sure if you guys remember, but there was a hilarious Jimmy Kimmel, I think it was Kimmel,
yes,
right?
Was
Not
Kimmel.
Fallon.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Kimmel video that came out in 2014. And it was in LA, and they went down the street to a local gym. And then just outside the gym, they did a series called Ask the Pedestrian. And they asked people as they were coming out if they ate gluten-free. And then they would pause the script and they would guess if the person said yes or no, and if the person knew what gluten was. So they would say yes, and then they would say, "What is gluten?" And then the person would stutter. And I think of all the people they asked, or that they showed anyway, only one of them knew what it was. And it's almost uncomfortable to watch.
I know, but that's Jimmy Kimmel's style. Gotta respect that. He does the same thing with Coachella, and he just makes up band names. And he's
That's
like,
right.
"Are you super excited for this band?" Like the tabletops, and and everyone's like, "Yeah, I'm so stoked about it." It's totally made up.
Well, gluten's not made up, and I guess maybe my personal experience, like quick 2-minute blurb on it. So my father is diagnosed celiac. That's something that he found out recently. I have an autoimmune condition, Graves, that we've talked about on the podcast ad nauseum. So that's enough on that. But one of the major triggers for that disease is gluten. And as a devout lover of pizza and bread and beer, I was crushed when I had to give up gluten a couple of years ago. Since then, it's actually been fine. There was an adjustment period, though. It's hard to be a lover of those things and then have to give it up. But I guess the first question then, Sil, and maybe do you want to start with it?
Sure.
So what is gluten?
Yeah, great question. So gluten is a family of proteins found primarily in a group of grains. It's broken down into a couple main areas, those proteins that people essentially have issues with, and that is glutenin and then gliadin. And so we think of gluten primarily in wheat products. It's also in barley and rye. And it's a very controversial topic because it still needs a lot of research in the area of gluten and why there's been so many intolerances and allergies that have come up. But essentially it is the proteins found in wheat products.
So are all grains have gluten in them?
So all grains do have a particular type of gluten. The ones like the glutenin and gliadin, not all grains contain that. So for instance, rice, millet, corn, quinoa, teff, buckwheat are considered gluten-free. Now, some people still might have a reaction to that based on the certain gluten proteins in that as well, but they are technically gluten-free.
And then what about oats?
Oats are often cross-contaminated, so especially if they are made in a facility that carries predominantly wheat products, people will have issues with oats as well. So if you are gluten-free, you would have to get the specific gluten-free oats that are named that.
And is it more, when you talk about the protein, like that specific protein, and you mentioned that we need more research on it, is it because of the way we produce those products now? Is that part of the reason?
Yeah. So one of the big areas that has been researched is the fact that our wheat has changed so much over the years. So how do we go from eating this predominantly in our diet to having so many issues with it today? And so a lot of the time when people, cut out gluten, it might not necessarily be just the gluten protein that they're having issues with or the gluten protein at all. It might be, the way that they sprayed the crop. So if it's non-organic, it might be the Roundup, which is a specific chemical that they use to spray predominantly wheat and corn and everything in North America specifically. I know that they use it around the world, but I just know about the studies done in North America. So a lot of people have a lot of digestive issues with, say, Roundup, this chemical that wheat is being sprayed with. So it's very unclear, and because it's so symptom based, it's hard to narrow it down to the actual why people are having reactions to it. So that's why I say there needs to be so much more research. And there's been some awesome books like Wheat Belly, but that's been also controversial in a lot of ways. Grain Brain, there's been a lot of different books that have come out, and a lot of research in specific autoimmunity, which you've talked about in regards to like the gluten-free diet.
Yeah, that's kind of how we not stumbled into it. I know you had more of an interest, but definitely dove in head first. And I think then the question that gets asked a lot is gluten bad for me?
Yeah, and like every frustrating answer, it depends. I think, in terms of like grains, there's so many cultures that use grains as their main part of their diet, and they live to 100 plus years and do really well. I think one of the biggest things is that they're heavily processed and chemically altered now. And then people specifically do have issues with the actual gluten protein, which we'll get into celiac, but just, on average it's a per person case by case situation in regards to gluten. So do I think everyone necessarily needs to go gluten-free? I think it could be beneficial, especially if they have negative reactions, but gluten itself can cause a lot of irritation to the gut. Unfortunately, it might be more of a gut health protocol, which we're going to talk about next week on the podcast, actually, with a member who is very well-versed in her gut health. So, we can't digest it. So that's the problem, is like, it's not just about the gluten protein. It's like the enzymes that are involved, the inflammation that it can cause to our gut lining. And so, it varies person to person, their exposure to it. And then also, sometimes when people are looking at gluten itself, it might just be the fact that they're eating a lot of refined grains. So that's causing a lot of issues. So it's stripped of nutrients, fiber, and it's just white bread, white pasta, sugar, and that causes an overload of toxins. And it could be just, again, adding to the problem, just in terms of like the types of, grains that they're choosing to eat.
So something that I didn't realize until we went down this path is that no one digests gluten. So regardless of whether or not you have a reaction to it or not, nobody can take that protein and use it within their body, correct?
Yes.
So everyone's expelling it through their system. Even if there's no reaction, it just passes through your system and is expelled. And the analogy that I think, I'm not sure if you used it or if someone else did, or if it was in a book that I was reading, but they talked about that protein going in and your digestive system acting as scissors and cutting into the individual amino acids to break them down so that you could digest them. But when it gets to gluten, it doesn't have the ability to cut through it.
So damn stubborn, basically.
Exactly. So as a result, you just get this clump of protein that then passes through the system. So what's interesting is that if you never ate gluten in your life, you would never be lacking something, correct? Which is, I think, maybe a misconception. People think we need it. We don't need it, or
it's
not
it's the fiber, the other things that are associated in grains, the other nutrients, B vitamins, that type of thing that again, we can be deficient if we're not eating enough of like a whole balanced diet outside of like the actual grains that contain gluten.
Okay, so if somebody's listening to this and they think I'm interested, Am I someone that should cut out gluten? Am I okay to eat it? What would you say to them? What symptoms do they typically present with if you have an issue with that particular protein?
Yeah, so I mean, digestive issues is what I see as a lot of the beginning stages, but not everyone has digestive issues. Like a lot of time people will tell me, oh, my digestion's great. They might have skin issues. They might have concentration issues, brain fog, poor attention span, fatigue, like extreme fatigue. They can have like a hangover feeling all the time. Like, just feeling like they went out the night before and that type of thing. So it can be, again, it's individualized, how it shows up in everybody. But, especially someone that has an autoimmune disease like yourself, like that, those are the first things that we go to, because essentially gluten, because it's, again, that protein that our body kind of looks at and says, like, I don't know what this is, and I can't digest it fully. It can be known as like a foreign substance to your body. So that's how the whole autoimmunity thing happens in the beginning. And especially with celiac disease is the extreme where the gut lining has actually been, completely irritated from specifically gluten in the gut, and, foreign substances are passing through, and that whole digestion process gets compromised. So celiac disease is like the extreme version. And then we have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which again has been controversial just based off of the research and pinpointing it to gluten specifically. But that is something that a lot of people do suffer for. And I think And I think one of the biggest things is to, if you cut it out for 3 weeks or a month and then reintroduce it and see how you feel.
Is that a timeline you would suggest? Just kind of to give people...
I mean, I would do minimum 3 weeks and then reintroduce it gradually, and then also, focus primarily on a gluten meal and then see how you react to it.
Rather than just going back in and going buck wild.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So doing a full elimination diet, there's other food allergens that you can also add into that, but that's a whole different conversation. But with gluten specifically, I always tell people, if you want to know if you feel better, just try it for, 3 weeks to a month. And, luckily we are in a situation nowadays where it is way more of an issue, and there's a lot of gluten-free options. That being said, not all gluten-free options are healthy. And that is a big misconception. So sometimes we can get, even more processed, even more nutrient deficient products out there that are gluten-free, but they're still causing issues because they don't have the other nutrients. So, leaning more towards the whole foods diet makes a lot more sense. And there's, like I said, there's a lot of grains that are typically not as inflammatory for most people.
Perfect. Guys, we hope that helped clear up some confusion on what gluten is, what it means to go gluten-free, and just a couple of quick tips. So next time the conversation turns into this sector, you can participate and you know what's happening. And just in case you're in LA and Kimmel comes up to you on the street, you can answer his question now confidently.
Yes.
If you think that this is something that you're suffering from, I would highly suggest that you try 3 weeks without it. There's nothing detrimental to going 3 weeks without these substances. In all likelihood, you'll just eat cleaner when you eliminate them, and that in itself will be helpful. So check back next Friday, brand new Biosteel Breakdown. I feel like you wanted to add something.
Yes, I just wanted to add that, with all of this and all of the food trends coming out, you just have to be your own body's detective. Like it might work for you. It might, again, it might not work for you. I think just trying it out and paying attention to your body and how it reacts to things is always the best plan.
Perfect. Check back next week, guys. Brand new Biosteel Breakdown. Thank you as always for being here.
Thank you.